The explosion stopped an hour ago, but Jake Collins could still hear the ringing in his ears. He sat in the corner of the destroyed bunker, his back against the cold metal wall. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead, but he barely noticed. Outside, the screams had stopped too. That was worse than the explosions. Jake had lived on New Haven for 3 years. It was supposed to be a quiet colony, far from the wars and conflicts of the inner systems. He had served his time in the military, fought in battles he tried hard to forget, and retired to this peaceful world to farm and forget. But peace never lasted. It never did. The attack came without warning. Ships appeared in the sky like dark birds blocking out the sun. They were massive, bigger than anything Jake had seen during his military days. The aliens inside them were even more terrifying. They called themselves the Vraxians, though Jake only learned that later. Right now, all he knew was that they were 9 feet tall, covered in scales, and stronger than any human. Jake heard footsteps outside the bunker. Heavy footsteps. He gripped his rifle tighter, though he only had 3 bullets left. He had used the rest defending the evacuation point, buying time for families to escape. He did not know if they made it. The Vraxian ships had weapons that turned buildings into dust. The whole colony was probably gone by now. The bunker door exploded inward. Jake fired his 3 remaining bullets at the massive shape that entered. The bullets hit, but they bounced off the alien's armor like pebbles. The Vraxian laughed. It was a deep rumbling sound that made Jake's chest hurt. More Vraxians entered behind the first one. They were all huge, all wearing black armor decorated with symbols Jake did not recognize. They carried weapons that glowed with blue energy. One of them pointed his weapon at Jake, but another Vraxian held up his hand. This one was different. He wore red armor instead of black, and his scales were darker. He also had scars across his face, old ones that looked like they came from many battles. The red-armored Vraxian stepped closer. He towered over Jake, who was 6 feet tall. The alien looked down at him with yellow eyes that reminded Jake of a snake. The Vraxian said something in his own language. It sounded like rocks grinding together. The other aliens laughed. Jake did not move. He stared back at the alien, refusing to look away. His military training took over. Never show fear to the enemy. Never give them the satisfaction. Even if you are about to die, die with your eyes open and your head high. The red Vraxian tilted his head, studying Jake like someone might study an interesting bug. He said something else, and this time his tone was different, curious. He reached down with one massive hand and grabbed Jake by the front of his shirt, lifting him off the ground as easily as Jake might lift a child. Jake did not struggle. There was no point. The alien was 10 times stronger than him. The Vraxian carried Jake out of the bunker. Outside, the colony was destroyed. Buildings lay in ruins. Fires burned everywhere. Bodies lay in the streets. Jake saw his neighbors, his friends, people he had shared meals with just yesterday. They were all dead now. The Vraxians had shown no mercy. Other humans were being herded together by the alien warriors. Most were women and children. The men had died fighting, trying to protect them. The survivors were being loaded onto transport ships. Jake knew what that meant. Slaves. The galaxy was full of stories about the Vraxian Empire and what they did to conquered worlds. But Jake was not taken to the transport ships. The red Vraxian carried him to a different ship, a bigger one. This was the command ship, Jake realized, the flagship of whoever was leading this attack. The inside was dark and cold, with metal walls covered in more of those strange symbols. Vraxian warriors walked past, each one bigger and more terrifying than the last. They looked at Jake and laughed. They walked through many corridors until they reached a large room. The red Vraxian finally put Jake down. Jake stood on shaky legs, looking around. The room was filled with cages. No, not cages, habitats. Each one held a different creature. Some looked like they came from water worlds with scales and fins. Others had fur and multiple eyes. One creature looked like it was made entirely of crystals. All of them looked miserable. This was a collection, a zoo. The Vraxian commander collected creatures from the worlds he conquered, keeping them as pets or trophies. Jake felt sick. He was going to be added to this collection, displayed like some rare animal. The red Vraxian pointed to an empty habitat, one with a force field shimmering across the entrance. 2 other aliens grabbed Jake and threw him inside. He hit the floor hard, the breath knocked out of his lungs. The force field activated fully, sealing him in. The Vraxian commander stood outside, watching him with those cold yellow eyes. He said something in his language. Even without understanding the words, Jake knew he was being mocked. The Vraxians left, their laughter echoing through the room. Jake pulled himself to his feet and looked at his new prison. It was about 20 feet on each side, with smooth walls and a hard floor. There was a sleeping platform in one corner and a strange device he guessed was for food and water. Nothing else. Nothing that could be used as a weapon. The other creatures in the room watched him. One of them, something that looked like a large cat with 6 legs, made a sad sound. Another creature, this one with tentacles and 3 eyes, just stared. They all looked defeated. They had given up. Jake sat down on the sleeping platform, his mind racing. He was alive. That was something. The Vraxians could have killed him back in the bunker, but they did not. They wanted him alive, wanted to keep him as some kind of pet. That meant they did not see him as a threat. That was their first mistake. Jake looked down at his hands. They were shaking, but not from fear. From anger. These aliens had destroyed his home, killed his friends, and now they were going to keep him in a cage for their amusement. They thought he was weak. They thought he was helpless. They thought humans were nothing compared to their mighty empire. They were wrong. Humans might not be the biggest or the strongest species in the galaxy. They did not have natural weapons or armor. But they had something else. Something the Vraxians clearly did not understand. Humans were survivors. They adapted. They learned. And they never stopped fighting, even when all hope seemed lost. Jake stood up and walked to the force field. He pressed his hand against it, feeling the energy buzz against his skin. The force field was strong, but everything had a weakness. Every prison had a way out. Every enemy had a flaw. He just needed to find it. The ship rumbled as it left the planet's orbit. Jake watched through a small window as New Haven became smaller and smaller, until it was just a blue dot in the darkness. His home was gone. His old life was over. But he was not finished yet, not by a long way. The Vraxians thought they had captured a pet. What they did not know was that they had brought an enemy onto their ship. An enemy who would study them, learn their weaknesses, and wait for the right moment. Jake had spent years learning how to fight, how to survive, how to turn bad situations into opportunities. The aliens had made a mistake by keeping him alive. It would be their last one. Jake settled into his habitat and began to watch everything around him. The guards who walked by, the patterns they followed, the way the ship worked. He had all the time in the world now, and he was going to use every second of it to plan his revenge. 3 weeks passed on the Vraxian battlecruiser. Jake marked each day by scratching a line into the corner of his habitat, where the guards could not see. 21 lines. 21 days of watching, learning, and planning. The Vraxian warriors came to the menagerie often. They liked to mock the creatures in their cages. They would bang on the force fields, make loud noises, and laugh at the prisoners inside. Jake watched them carefully. He noticed everything. The way they walked, the way they held their weapons, the way they talked to each other. Most Vraxians were overconfident. They relied on their size and strength. They fought with brute force, swinging their weapons like clubs. They had power, but no real technique, no strategy. They expected every enemy to be weaker than them, so they never learned to fight smart. That was their weakness. One Vraxian came more often than the others. His name was Krell, and he was second in command of the ship. He was cruel even by Vraxian standards. He enjoyed tormenting the prisoners, especially Jake. Krell would stand outside the habitat and make jokes about how weak humans were, how soft their skin was, how they needed cooked food and could not even breathe certain atmospheres without help. Jake never responded. He just stared back at Krell with calm eyes. This seemed to annoy the alien even more. Krell wanted fear. He wanted Jake to beg or cry or show some kind of weakness. But Jake gave him nothing. He had learned long ago that bullies fed on fear. Take away their satisfaction and they made mistakes. Jake also learned about the ship itself. He watched the guards change shifts. He noticed that they changed every 8 hours, and there were always 5 minutes between shifts when no guards were present. He saw how the force fields worked, how they were powered by nodes at the top of each habitat. He memorized the layout of the corridors outside the menagerie, counting his steps when he was occasionally moved for cleaning. The other prisoners noticed him too. The 6-legged cat creature watched him with intelligent eyes. The tentacled being seemed to understand that Jake was different from the other captives. Even the crystal creature, which barely moved, turned slightly toward him when he exercised each day. They could sense something in him. Hope maybe, or determination. On the 22nd day, everything changed. The red-armored commander entered the menagerie with a group of warriors. Jake had learned his name from the guards' conversations. Commander Zarthok, the legendary conqueror who had destroyed 50 worlds. He was a hero to the Vraxians, a monster to everyone else. Zarthok stood in the center of the room and announced something in the Vraxian language. The warriors cheered. The prisoners cowered. Jake understood enough from their body language to know this was bad news. A Vraxian technician activated a translation device. Zarthok's voice filled the room, now in broken but understandable English. The commander was hosting a feast tomorrow night. Important members of the Vraxian elite would attend, and for entertainment the creatures in the menagerie would fight each other in the ship's arena. Jake felt his stomach tighten. This was it. This was the moment he had been preparing for, even if he did not know exactly when it would come. The Vraxians wanted a show. They wanted to see their captives tear each other apart for amusement. Zarthok walked slowly past each habitat, looking at the creatures inside. When he reached Jake's cage, he stopped and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. The commander said something, and the translator spoke again. Jake would fight the Korgan beast. If he somehow won, he would get better living conditions. The commander clearly thought this was impossible. The other Vraxians laughed at the idea of the tiny human surviving even 1 minute against the Korgan. After the Vraxians left, Jake looked across the room at the Korgan's habitat. The creature was massive, easily 8 feet tall and covered in thick muscle. It came from a high-gravity world, which meant its bones were dense and its strength was incredible. It had 4 arms, each one ending in sharp claws. Its face was mostly mouth, full of teeth designed for ripping and tearing. The Korgan was pacing in its habitat, agitated. It was a predator, a warrior from a species that valued combat above all else. It had probably been a great fighter on its own world before the Vraxians captured it. Now it was trapped, angry and desperate. That made it dangerous. But it also made it predictable. Jake spent the rest of that day watching the Korgan. He noticed how it moved, how it reacted when the guards taunted it, where it positioned itself in its habitat. Predators had patterns. They fell back on instinct when threatened. If Jake could predict those instincts, he might have a chance. That night, Jake did not sleep. He exercised instead, push-ups, sit-ups, stretches to keep his muscles loose. He went through combat drills in his mind, remembering his training from years ago. Hand-to-hand combat, pressure points, weak spots in the body, ways to use an opponent's strength against them. The 6-legged cat creature watched him exercise. When Jake finished, the creature made a soft sound. It almost sounded encouraging. Jake nodded at it. At least someone believed he had a chance. The next evening came too quickly. Vraxian guards arrived and opened Jake's habitat. They put heavy chains on his wrists and ankles. The chains were meant to humiliate him, to make him seem like a dangerous animal being led to slaughter. Jake did not resist. He walked calmly as they led him through the ship's corridors. The arena was huge. It was circular, about 100 feet across, with smooth metal floors and high walls. Above the walls, thousands of Vraxians sat in seats talking and laughing. They were dressed in fancy clothes, drinking strange liquids from golden cups. This was a party for them, a celebration. Jake was led to the center of the arena. The guards removed his chains but left him with nothing else. No weapons, no armor, just his body and his mind. Across the arena, another gate opened. The Korgan beast charged out, roaring so loud that Jake felt it in his bones. The crowd went wild. They cheered and shouted, placing bets on how quickly the human would die. Zarthok sat in a special seat above the arena, watching with those cold yellow eyes. Krell stood beside him, grinning. They were all waiting for the show to begin. The Korgan circled Jake slowly, sizing him up. It was smart enough not to rush in blindly. Jake stood perfectly still, watching the creature. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He had survived worse than this. Wars, ambushes, situations where he should have died but somehow lived. This was just another battle. The Korgan made its move. It charged forward on all 4 arms, moving faster than something that big should be able to move. Its claws reached for Jake, aiming to grab him and tear him apart. The Vraxians leaned forward in their seats, eager to see blood. But Jake was not there anymore. He had moved at the last possible second, rolling to the side. The Korgan's momentum carried it past him, its claws scraping against the metal floor. Before the creature could turn around, Jake was already moving again. He had spotted what he was looking for. The Korgan's joints, the places where armor was thinner. The weak points every creature had, no matter how strong. The laughter in the arena began to fade. The Vraxians watched in confusion as the small human refused to die. They did not understand what they were seeing. They did not realize that they were watching something their empire had never encountered before, a human who refused to give up. A human who fought with his brain as much as his body. A human who was just getting started. The Korgan spun around, confused and angry. No prey had ever dodged it so easily. The creature roared again and charged, this time faster and more aggressive. Jake kept moving. He did not try to match the Korgan's strength. That would be suicide. Instead, he used the arena itself. He kept obstacles between himself and the beast. He made it chase him, made it waste energy. The Vraxians in the crowd started to get restless. This was not the quick kill they expected. Some of them booed. Others shouted for the Korgan to finish the human already. But Zarthok remained silent, watching carefully. His yellow eyes narrowed. He was beginning to realize that something was different about this human. Jake waited for his moment. The Korgan was getting frustrated now, making mistakes. It swung wildly with its claws, trying to hit Jake by sheer luck. But Jake had fought angry opponents before. They always left openings, always made themselves vulnerable when they stopped thinking and just attacked. The opening came when the Korgan overextended on a lunge. Its weight shifted forward, and for just a second its back was exposed. Jake moved in fast. He jumped onto the creature's back, wrapping his legs around its thick neck. The Korgan tried to throw him off, but Jake held on tight. He had done this before with other large opponents. Size meant nothing if you knew where to strike. Jake's fingers found the neural cluster at the base of the Korgan's skull. Every creature with a spine had one. It was a concentration of nerves that controlled the body. Hit it hard enough and the whole system shut down. Jake had learned this technique during his military training. It worked on humans. It worked on aliens too. The Korgan went down hard, crashing to the arena floor. It was not dead, just unconscious. Jake rolled off its back and stood up, breathing hard. His body hurt everywhere. The Korgan had landed a few hits during the fight, and Jake knew he would have bruises tomorrow. If he lived that long, the arena was completely silent. Thousands of Vraxians stared down at the scene, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. A human, the weakest species they had ever seen, had defeated a Korgan warrior beast. It should not be possible. Yet there the human stood, alive and victorious. Krell was the first to break the silence. He roared in anger and jumped down into the arena. His massive feet hit the metal floor with a boom that echoed through the space. He pointed at Jake and shouted something in the Vraxian language. His face was twisted with rage. The translator device crackled to life. Krell was demanding another fight. He said Jake had won by luck, that the Korgan was weak from captivity. Krell wanted to face Jake himself. He wanted to prove that Vraxians were superior to humans. He wanted to restore his species' honor by crushing this tiny creature who had embarrassed them. Zarthok stood up from his seat. He looked at Krell, then at Jake, then back at Krell. After a long moment, he nodded. The crowd erupted in cheers. This was going to be even better entertainment. A Vraxian warrior against the strange human. Now they would see a real fight. Jake wanted to refuse. His body was tired. His muscles ached. He needed rest, water, time to recover. But he knew the Vraxians would not give him any of those things. If he refused to fight, they would probably just kill him. At least in the arena he had a chance. Krell was given a weapon. It was a long blade with a curved edge made from some kind of black metal. The weapon glowed slightly, probably some kind of energy enhancement. Krell swung it a few times, showing off for the crowd. The Vraxians cheered louder. They loved Krell. He was everything they valued: strength, aggression, cruelty. Jake was given nothing. The guards laughed as they backed away, leaving him alone in the arena with the armed Vraxian warrior. This was not a fair fight. It was an execution. The Vraxians wanted to see Jake die slowly, painfully, as punishment for making them look weak. Krell approached slowly. He was taking his time, enjoying the moment. He said something in his language, probably taunting Jake. The human just watched him, calculating. Krell was bigger and stronger than the Korgan had been. He also had a weapon and armor, but he had weaknesses too. Jake could see them. Krell's armor had joints. The black metal plates had to move, which meant there were gaps between them. Small gaps, but gaps nonetheless. His weapon was heavy, which meant his swings would be powerful but slow. And most importantly, Krell was overconfident. He thought he had already won. The Vraxian charged. His blade came down in a massive overhead swing meant to cut Jake in half. Jake sidestepped at the last moment. The blade hit the arena floor with a shower of sparks. Before Krell could raise the weapon again, Jake was inside his guard. He struck at the joints in Krell's armor, targeting the weak points with quick, precise hits. Krell roared and swung wildly, trying to hit Jake with his blade or his fists, but Jake stayed close, moving with Krell's body. This was close-quarters combat, something Jake had trained for extensively. At this range, Krell's size was a disadvantage. He could not swing his weapon properly. He could not use his strength effectively. Jake found what he was looking for. The gap in the armor at Krell's knee. He drove his heel into it with all his strength. Something cracked. Krell howled in pain and dropped to one knee. His weapon fell from his hand, clattering across the arena floor. The crowd had gone silent again. Krell tried to stand, but his damaged knee would not support his weight. He looked up at Jake with shock and hatred in his eyes. He could not believe what was happening. A human, a tiny, soft creature, had brought him down. Him, the second in command of the most powerful battlecruiser in the Vraxian fleet. Jake picked up Krell's fallen weapon. It was heavy but manageable. He pointed the blade at Krell's throat. The crowd held its breath. Jake could kill him right now. One thrust and it would be over. Revenge for New Haven, for all the people Krell had probably killed during his long career of conquest. But Jake lowered the weapon. He stepped back, letting Krell live. Killing him would accomplish nothing. It would not bring back the dead. And more importantly, keeping Krell alive sent a message. Humans were not like the Vraxians. They did not kill for sport or pride. They were better than that. Jake dropped the weapon and looked up at Zarthok. The commander stared back at him, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire arena seemed frozen in time. Then Zarthok did something unexpected. He began to clap slowly. The sound echoed through the silent arena. Other Vraxians joined in, hesitant at first, then louder. They were not cheering for Krell's defeat. They were acknowledging Jake's victory. Even they, in their arrogance, could recognize skill when they saw it. The tiny human pet had become something else in their eyes. Something dangerous, something worthy of respect. And that was exactly what Jake needed them to think. Jake was returned to the menagerie, but things were different now. The guards no longer laughed at him. They watched him carefully, keeping their distance. Even the other prisoners looked at him with new eyes. The six-legged cat creature approached the edge of its habitat, as close to Jake's cage as it could get. It made that soft sound again, but this time it was louder, clearer, almost like it was trying to communicate. Jake sat in his habitat and thought about what to do next. He had won respect from the Vraxians, but that did not change his situation. He was still a prisoner, still trapped on this ship heading deeper into enemy territory. The other prisoners were still suffering. New Haven was still destroyed. Nothing had really changed, but something had changed. Jake had information now. He had seen the arena, walked through more of the ship, observed how the Vraxians reacted under pressure. And he had planted a seed in their minds. They no longer saw him as helpless. That meant they might not see the other prisoners as helpless either. That fear could be useful. Over the next few days, Jake began to communicate with the other prisoners. It was not easy. They all spoke different languages, but there were ways to communicate without words. Gestures, drawings in the dust, patterns tapped on the walls. Slowly, Jake learned about them. The six-legged cat creature was named something that sounded like a musical note. Jake called it Harmony. It came from a forest world where its species hunted in packs. Before capture, Harmony had been a scout leader. The tentacled being was called 3. It had been an engineer on its water world, skilled at building and fixing things. The crystal creature did not have a name Jake could pronounce, so he called it Bright. It communicated through colors and light patterns and had once been a teacher. There were others too. A flying creature that had been a messenger. A strong rock-like being that had been a construction worker. An insect-like alien that had served in its planet's military. All of them had been leaders or warriors or skilled workers before the Vraxians captured them. All of them had given up hope. Until now, Jake showed them that resistance was possible. He shared what he knew about the ship. He explained weak points in Vraxian armor. He taught them about teamwork and tactics. Slowly, the prisoners began to transform. They exercised together when the guards were not watching. They practiced fighting techniques. They started to plan. Meanwhile, Zarthok was having problems of his own. The commander sat in his private quarters drinking a bitter liquid that helped him think. The human had disturbed him. Defeating the Korgan could be explained as luck. But defeating Krell required skill. Real skill? How did a species so physically weak develop such effective fighting techniques? Zarthok summoned his science officer, a thin Vraxian named Vex. Vex was unusual for his species. He preferred studying to fighting, asking questions instead of giving orders. This made him unpopular among the other warriors, but valuable to Zarthok. The commander needed someone who could think, not just punch. Vex entered the commander's quarters nervously. Zarthok ordered him to research everything about humans. Their biology, their history, their culture, everything. Vex bowed and left quickly, grateful to have a task that kept him away from the disappointed and angry warriors throughout the ship. What Vex discovered over the next week horrified him. He accessed the Vraxian database, which contained information on every species they had encountered. The entry on humans was marked as insignificant. Low threat level, weak, easy to conquer. But Vex dug deeper, accessing human data networks that had been captured during raids. Humans had been fighting wars for their entire history. 10,000 years of constant conflict. They had developed thousands of different martial arts and combat systems. They hunted creatures stronger than themselves for food and sport. They survived in environments that would kill most species. They could run for days without stopping, a trait left over from when they chased prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. More troubling was their psychology. Humans bonded with other species easily. They formed alliances. They organized. They had something called pack mentality, where they would sacrifice themselves for their group. And they never stopped. Even when defeated, humans would keep fighting. They called it determination, stubbornness, the refusal to give up. Vex rushed to find Zarthok. The commander was inspecting weapon systems on the ship's lower levels. Vex pulled him aside and explained what he had learned. With every word, Zarthok's expression grew darker. The commander realized his mistake. He had brought a human onto his ship, given it time to study them, let it interact with other prisoners, and worst of all, he had shown weakness by sparing its life. Zarthok ordered immediate changes. Double the guards at the menagerie. No more interaction between prisoners. No more chances for the human to observe or plan. But these orders came too late. Jake's plan was already in motion. That night, during the shift change, there was a 5-minute window when no guards were present. Jake had noticed this pattern weeks ago. 5 minutes was not much time, but it was enough. 3 had been working on the force field nodes whenever the guards were not watching. The engineer had found a way to overload them using a specific frequency of tapping. It would only work once and only if the timing was perfect. The prisoners began tapping in sequence. The sound echoed through the menagerie, a rhythm that built and built. The force field nodes started to glow brighter, then brighter still. Jake counted down in his head. 3, 2, 1. The force fields collapsed all at once. Alarms immediately started blaring throughout the ship. The prisoners rushed out of their habitats. They had practiced this moment in their minds 1,000 times. No hesitation, no confusion. Everyone knew their role. Harmony and the other quick ones went for the weapon storage at the back of the menagerie. 3 and the technical minds headed for the control panel to lock the doors. Bright and the others who could not fight went to free the enslaved workers in the lower levels. And Jake went for the guard station, where he knew weapons and armor were kept. The first guards arrived 30 seconds later. They found the menagerie empty except for Jake, who was now armed with a Vraxian energy rifle and wearing pieces of armor he had scavenged. The guards hesitated, remembering what they had seen in the arena. That hesitation cost them. Jake fired twice. Both guards went down, more guards came. Jake and the other prisoners fought them off, using the narrow corridors to their advantage. The Vraxians were strong in open combat, but in tight spaces their size worked against them. The prisoners knew this. They used it. Every small advantage mattered now. The battlecruiser descended into chaos. Alarms blared. Warriors ran through the corridors, confused and angry. The prisoners scattered in groups, hitting different targets. Supply rooms, power junctions, communication arrays. This was not a traditional prison break. This was a coordinated military operation, led by someone who understood how to fight against superior numbers. The Vraxian Empire had made a terrible mistake. They had captured a human warrior and given him time to prepare. Now they were about to learn what humans did best: survive, adapt, and never stop fighting. The uprising spread through the battlecruiser like fire. Enslaved workers from a dozen different species joined the fight. They had been waiting for years for an opportunity like this. Someone to lead them, someone to show them that the Vraxians could be beaten. Jake gave them that hope. The rebels moved in small groups using tactics Jake had taught them. Hit and run. Strike the enemy's weak points. Never stand and fight when you can retreat and strike again. The Vraxians were used to direct combat. They expected enemies to face them head-on. This guerrilla warfare confused them, made them angry, made them make mistakes. 3 led a team that sabotaged the ship's power systems. Lights flickered throughout the cruiser. Life support went offline in some sections. The Vraxians scrambled to fix the damage, pulling warriors away from the fighting. Harmony and the hunters used the darkness to ambush patrols. They moved silently through the corridors, striking without warning. The rock-like being and the strong ones held choke points, preventing reinforcements from reaching key areas. Jake led the main assault toward the command deck. This was the heart of the ship. If they could take it, they could control everything: weapons, navigation, communications. But getting there would not be easy. Zarthok had pulled back his elite warriors to defend the command deck. These were not regular soldiers. These were veterans who had conquered worlds. The corridor leading to the command deck was long and narrow. The perfect place for a defense. Vraxian warriors stood in formation, shields locked together, energy weapons charged. They had orders to kill anyone who tried to pass. No prisoners, no mercy. Jake studied the situation. A frontal assault would fail. The Vraxians were too well positioned. He needed a different approach. He signaled to 3 who had joined his group. The engineer understood immediately. There were maintenance tunnels throughout the ship. Small passages meant for repairs, too small for Vraxians to fit through, but perfect for smaller species. Jake and a team of smaller rebels crawled through the maintenance tunnels. It was tight and uncomfortable. The metal was hot from the ship's systems, but they pushed forward. After 10 minutes, they emerged behind the Vraxian defensive line. The warriors never saw them coming. Jake's group hit them from behind while the main force attacked from the front. The Vraxians tried to defend both directions at once, but their formation broke. Without their shields locked together, they were vulnerable. The battle was brutal and quick. Within minutes, the corridor was clear. The command deck doors were sealed. Heavy blast doors meant to withstand ship-to-ship combat. 3 examined the control panel. It would take time to bypass the security, time they might not have. More Vraxian reinforcements would arrive soon. But the doors opened from the inside. Zarthok stood there alone. His red armor was polished and perfect. His weapons were drawn. He looked at Jake with those cold yellow eyes. The commander spoke in his grinding voice. The translator device on the wall activated, turning his words into English. Zarthok wanted to settle this the old way. Single combat. Leader against leader. If Jake won, the commander would order his remaining warriors to stand down. If Zarthok won, the rebellion would end. It was a trap, obviously. The Vraxians never honored their word, but Jake accepted anyway. He had to. This was the only way to end the fighting without more deaths. Jake entered the command deck. The doors sealed behind him. It was just him and Zarthok now. The commander was massive, even for a Vraxian. 9 feet of muscle and scales and centuries of combat experience. He held 2 curved blades that glowed with energy. His armor had no weak points that Jake could see. They circled each other slowly. Zarthok was not like Krell. He was patient, calculating. He had watched Jake's fights in the arena. He knew the humans' tactics. Jake realized this was going to be harder than any battle he had fought before. Zarthok struck first. His blades moved faster than something that large should move. Jake barely dodged the first strike. The second one caught his shoulder, cutting through his armor. Pain shot through his body, but Jake kept moving. Stop moving and you die. That was the rule. Jake tried his usual tactics. Target the joints. Use speed and agility. Stay close where the larger opponent cannot use their reach. But Zarthok adapted. He anticipated Jake's moves, blocked his attacks. This was a warrior who had fought thousands of battles, who had conquered entire worlds. He was not going to be beaten easily. They fought across the command deck. Jake was getting tired. His shoulder wound was bleeding badly. Zarthok had only minor scratches. The commander was winning. He knew it, Jake knew it. But Jake also knew something Zarthok did not understand about humans. They were at their most dangerous when cornered. Jake stopped trying to win through skill. He changed tactics. He let Zarthok hit him, took the damage, got in close enough that the commander's blades could not swing properly. And then Jake did something the Vraxian never expected. He fought dirty. Humans did not have honor-bound combat rules. They had no warrior code that forbade certain techniques. When survival was on the line, humans used everything. Anything. Jake went for the eyes, the throat, the nerve clusters. He used his teeth, his elbows, his forehead. He fought like an animal because that is what humans were at their core, successful predators who refused to die. Zarthok stumbled backward, shocked by the ferocity. Jake pressed the attack. He grabbed one of the fallen energy blades and drove it into the gap in Zarthok's armor at the neck. The commander fell to his knees. His weapons clattered to the floor. He looked up at Jake with something new in his yellow eyes. Not fear, understanding. Jake stood over the defeated commander, breathing hard. He could kill Zarthok now, end the life of the being who had destroyed New Haven. But Jake lowered his weapon. He had proven his point. Humans were not weak. They were not prey. They were survivors who would do whatever it took to win. Jake opened the command deck doors. His allies rushed in. They secured Zarthok and took control of the ship's systems. The commander, true to his word, ordered his remaining warriors to stand down. The battle was over. The rebels had won. Jake activated the ship's long-range communications. He broadcast a message to the Vraxian fleet and to any human ships that might be listening. He told them what had happened, how a single human and a group of enslaved aliens had taken control of a Vraxian battlecruiser. He wanted the galaxy to know humans could be conquered, but they would never be broken. 3 managed to chart a course back to human space. It would take weeks to get there. But they had time now. They had freedom. The former prisoners celebrated. Some cried. Others just sat quietly, unable to believe they were finally going home. Jake stood on the command deck looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Vraxian Empire was receiving his message. They were learning that humans were not the weak species they thought. Every empire that had underestimated humans had eventually fallen. The Vraxians would learn this lesson too. Harmony approached and stood beside Jake. The 6-legged creature made its soft sound. Jake smiled. They had done it. A human, a 6-legged cat, an engineer with tentacles, a crystal being, and dozens of other so-called weak species had defeated the mighty Vraxian Empire's best warriors. They had proven that strength alone did not win wars. Intelligence did. Determination did. Unity did. The battlecruiser jumped to faster-than-light speed heading home. Behind them, the Vraxian Empire faced a new reality. Humans were coming, not as slaves or victims, but as warriors who refused to be conquered. The tiny species they had laughed at was about to become their greatest threat. And across the galaxy, other oppressed species were watching, learning, hoping. The age of the Vraxian Empire was ending. The age of resistance had begun.